Welcome to Commentate, the official podcast of the School of Communication at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. We bring you a fast-paced 10-minute spotlight on the voices, stories, and projects shaping journalism, media, and communication on our campus. 10 minutes, one story, all Maverick.
Welcome to Comm in 10. I'm Heather Hundley, the host with
Jodine Brownlee.
And today we have Andrew Stem. He is a lecturer in the School of Communication. His master's degree was from Valparaiso, correct?
Yep.
And been with us at least 6 years.
8.
8 years. I knew I was a little off by that. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here chatting with you guys today.
Thanks, Andrew.
Great. So Andrew is, I'll just brag and say, an accomplished journalist, and he's worked for the World Herald and other papers.
Also the Herald Palladium in Southwest Michigan and the Times of Northwest Indiana.
Okay, great. And he teaches journalism classes here in the School of Communication. So that will lead us to our first question. Welcome, by the way. So tell us about your background in journalism, and then where you've been teaching, where you've been working. I know we just briefly touched on it, but let's hear a little bit more.
Sure. I started in high school. I became the editor of my high school's sports editor of my high school's newspaper, The Windup. That carried on to college, and I found out that one of the reasons I picked Valpo as an undergrad institution was they had a major in journalism. And I learned later as I was going through that you could actually make an individualized major, so I got one in sports journalism and worked for the student newspaper there. Also worked for the campus radio station, broadcasting sporting events. Nice. When I graduated, I started working back home as a sports writer for the paper in Southwest Michigan. I took a little bit of a break after I went to grad school, got a master's degree in Latin, and got a teaching license. And it was actually when I was teaching high school, I became the newspaper advisor, and that's what kind of kicked me back towards media. So then I ended up back at Valpo, got a master's in sports media, and got very fortunate that I was allowed to write for the local paper there. And then my advisor actually asked me to stay on and teach courses, and I've been teaching ever since, I guess, the fall of 2013.
All right, cool. So it sounds like you like sports if you're bringing in journalism and the sports coverage.
I think that's a pretty fair assessment to make, yeah.
All right, cool.
Well, and it's interesting because the state of journalism can kind of, you can paint sort of a large swath over sports, entertainment, and what's considered news. And thinking of that, what are your thoughts on the state of news today?
It's an interesting question. It's an interesting subject. It's like it's both good and bad because we've seen with the politics over the last 20 years how important a need for good journalists are. There was a movement 6 or so years ago about folks really put efforts into subscribing to places to like the New York Times and the Washington Post and other big national papers, and you've got to support journalism. And it's especially important because you can see on the flip side that newsrooms are getting smaller all the time. The World Herald has gone from 120 full-time employees to fewer than 30 now. Newsrooms are getting bought up by venture capitalists and are getting cleared out and very slowly just wrung out to a point where there are so few people left who still care about trying to do good journalism that it becomes hard for folks. On the flip side, that has given rise to, independent newsrooms. Like here in Nebraska, we see the Nebraska Examiner, the Flatwater Free Press, and they go into really big, in-depth type stories. And so, it's positive because there's still a need for it, and there's still a lot of people, I see it in our students all the time, who want to be out there and make a difference and telling these stories. And it's also hard because it's not the easiest field to get started in and to know that there's a ton of job security. So it's mixed, but more important than ever, and that's the message I try to deliver to our students.
So these journalists that are losing jobs and that newspapers that are going under and that sort of thing, it's terrible news for the state of journalism. I think that's the very negative side. Is this all business decisions? Is this the big company that says let's increase our profits by getting one person to cover a wider beat, or what's happening?
I mean, I think that's probably it, is that when you look at it, I think people realized with the advent of the internet that you don't make money off newspapers. They gave themselves away for free for so long, and then there are ads everywhere, so companies don't need to advertise in the newspapers anymore, so there's less money going around. And, it gets to a point where people have found other ways to get their news. That it's not like I'm one of those people that likes hard copies of things. I can't handle reading a book on a tablet or anything. I like having to hold in the book, and I like a hard copy of a newspaper, but there are fewer and fewer people who are like that. And so, there's been this drastic change, and so there's not a ton of money to be made in newspapers. So what a lot of folks have done is they buy up the newspapers as they can, and they wring as much money out of them as they possibly can, and then just kind of discard them to the side. And they don't care because it's not their news that they're worried about, but it's the citizens of people who live wherever that now all of a sudden find themselves perhaps being in a news desert and having real issues about finding out what's really going on in the world.
Yeah. So we're talking about some of the negatives, some of the disappointing. I'm like, it's not real good to recruit students then. So do you have any optimism? I mean, you're still teaching it. You still
Absolutely.
work with students,
Absolutely.
so.
Journalism is still being consumed just in different ways,
Yeah.
right? Newspapers may be stop printing or whatever, but that doesn't mean that there's not a newsroom full of people who are driving the engine behind making sure that folks know what's going on. There's still a tremendous desire on journalist folks to provide folks with that news, and there is still a tremendous need for people to get this information. So I don't want to be all doom and gloom. It will be delivered differently than when I was a kid. But there's all sorts of news apps. There's all sorts of just online places to get journalism that combine both the long form journalism and the immediate kind of breaking news coverage that people just have to know where to find it, and we have to make sure people want to seek it out, and we do that by creating good journalists, and that's what we do here. The students have a passion for finding the story and really getting in there. You can see it at places like Mav Radio and through the Gateway and other places, is that our students really have a passion for doing the work and providing folks with information, and that's all you can ask. There will be avenues for them to have their work be found.
Well, what about, it seems to me that now I've got experience under my belt, which kind of is AKA I'm older, and I've seen things, ebb and flow in these sort of cycles. And it seems to me what I'm seeing academically and maybe even societally is that there is sort of this pendulum swinging back to older, trusted news journalism, checking the facts, checking them twice. And I've seen a lot of enthusiasm with our students. What have you seen in the classroom?
I would say absolutely the same. There is a tremendous amount of enthusiasm to make sure that you're delivering the story, that you find what the story is, and our students are so good at finding stories and being able to tell them. But that's really it. And when you end up around here, UNO doesn't always end up in the news. So for our students to be able to tell stories about what's going on campus, because for the rest of the student body, that's what really matters to them, and to be able to tell stories about what's going on in the Omaha area. We see that they've got this tremendous desire to be out there and telling these stories and sharing this information. And it's really, really heartening to see, because like we talked about, it could be really easy to become depressed about the state of journalism. Right. But you see these young folks, and they've got such a passion for doing the work and for telling the stories that it gives me hope that the pendulum will swing back the other way towards journalism being something that is viewed by everybody as something that's incredibly necessary here in the future.
Great.
Well, and I'm wondering about the sports component of this, because we're all sports enthusiasts, all of us in this room. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because there would be a time when it was a really difficult job to get to land the play-by-play or color. Now we have social media, so sometimes the roles just change and evolve. But I personally see it as more opportunity now, because the technology allows us to go to high schools and colleges and streams everywhere. What are your thoughts, especially with your degree and your background in sports and media?
Sure. One of the wonders of the internet is it's made work so available, right? That you don't need to be, I'm thinking about independent bloggers and all sorts of other things like, here locally on campus, I know there's a blog called MavPuck, which covers UNO hockey pretty closely.
Nice. That
you no longer have to work for one of the traditional news organizations to be able to cover a team. For our students at the Gateway and Mav Radio, that certainly helps, but it's just as easy if you want to write about the Minnesota Vikings or the Kansas City Chiefs or whatever. You can just disseminate what your writing is out on the internet and a blog on various websites, and if you write well enough, people will find you, and then that will lead you to more of the traditional media locales if that's what you want. But the internet has made it so that you can cover teams much more easily. You don't need to be just with a traditional organization anymore.
Okay, great. And real quick before we wrap up, just I know that not every student that's in our JMC program wants to be a journalist, but what are those transferable skills?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, no matter what job you get into, you're going to need to be able to write clearly, and you're going to need to be able to think about how you communicate, whether you want to do public relations or whether you're going to do, emerging media and think about how you set up a storyboard or how you ask good questions. That's another big one, is how you conduct an interview, how you ask good questions, whether you're sitting in a situation like this, or you're doing consider this or whatever. All of the applicable skills, how to think creatively, how to write clearly, and how to communicate effectively will benefit you no matter what avenue you want to take your JMC degree in.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for being with us, Andrew.
Thank you very much for the time. I appreciate it.
Yep.
Thanks for listening to Commentate, a production of the School of Communication at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. New episodes drop every other week, so be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. And don't forget to follow the School of Communication on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube for the latest episodes and behind-the-scene updates.